Do you guys want to have a quick example, just on the terms of the three things we've dealt with so far, the legs, the torso, the arms and hands, of some simple patterns that you can start spotting? You'll see them more when people pay less attention, and you probably spot them in yourself as well as you do that. Would that be useful to you guys? Sure. Right? So let's run through them very quickly. And again, as I say, we could probably spend 3-4 days just talking about body language and universal patterns. I mean, you can sit down if you want, but honestly, this is going to be a very quick thing. Well, we may as well just wait then. By the way, notice this is also a pattern right here, right? Well, the people who are willing to wait it out, there's people who want to sit down, people who want to take notes, so that the patterns are constantly flowing. And I'll just wait. All right, guys, so here are some very common patterns that you can just have at the top of your legs. That was a nice Freudian slip, off the top of your head. The first pattern is leg position, right? The legs will tell you where the mind is going. Has anyone here ever noticed that when they're driving a car and they look at something else, their hands go towards, like say there's an accident or something like that, or there's a cute little puppy on the side of the road, the hands go towards it and so does the car. The legs are the same thing. The legs will show intention. So in terms of meeting someone, if someone's legs start pointing away from you, what that's saying is the person wants to leave. Now, it might be because if they want to do that on actually meeting you, so they have an uncommitted foot, for example, that means that either the person wants to stay just a short time or for whatever reason. So if he wants to stay for a short time, it might be because he's in a hurry, or it might be because he doesn't like you. Now, the key is you can't tell the difference yet. It's only at the beginning of an indicator, right? There'll be other things you have to look for to add on to it to be able to determine it's more likely that they dislike me than that they want to leave because they're in a hurry, or vice versa. Does that make sense? But when someone's got an uncommitted foot, basically what they're doing is, mentally, they're already leaving, and so either you shorten your interaction, or if you determine from the other signals that they don't like you, you have a little bit more work cut out to make them comfortable. Make sense? That has to do with distance. If they stop at a further distance, they tend to feel less comfortable around you. But this also has a lot of cultural variations. For example, in India, they have almost no concept of personal space. So, and this is when I used to do executive coaching. This used to be a very interesting thing when we had working with international executives. There used to be a lot of cultural issues to do with basically just body language. And people didn't realize it. I mean, imagine this. You have, I was doing this in Malaysia. You have a Malaysian woman who's Muslim with a full, shower and everything, so very traditionally Muslim. You have an Indian gentleman, very smart in what he does, but has almost no awareness of personal body space. So he's touching, he's hugging, he's invading that person's body space. And for her, the comfortable distance was probably twice of what it would be for a Western person. Can you see the working relationship breaking down just on that level alone, right? So personal space is a very important thing, and it tends to be cultural as well. Everyone has some level of personal space, but it tends to be cultural. As I say, the Indian thing tends to be more of an extreme case. In Muslim cultures, like Arabic cultures, the personal space is much closer, but there is a defined space between friendship and distance. Incidentally, things like men holding hands is perfectly acceptable in the Arab world. It's actually quite natural. Whereas, of course, in Europe and North America, as a rule, you'd think like, why do you guys hold hands? Okay, fine, it's very progressive, right? But it means very different things, right? So again, notice how the things we would spend most time focusing on, the hand-holding, actually tells us the least amount unless we know the cultural background, right? So distance and leg position will tell you, how they're feeling towards you in terms of territory. Body again. Now think about the body. The body, from the neck down to here, is mostly soft stuff, right? So when people try and protect this, it's because they're unconsciously feeling stressed or threatened in some way, right? So you'll notice something, for example, happening at a party. When someone enters someone else's space, say you're throwing a party, you'll notice something very interesting happen, especially if it's a guy on guy because of the whole mammalian conflict thing. Guys will typically, when they come in, you knock on the door, you open the door, and you go, hi, welcome, I'm the host. The other person will typically something like this. Hi, thanks for welcoming me, right? What they're doing is, unconsciously, they're acknowledging, this is not my territory, allow me in, right? So the torso does that. The thing that we're most familiar with, of course, is the cold shoulder. We don't like someone, we'll turn our back onto them. It's not that, part of the reason for that is we're protecting the vital organs, right? So if you're talking to someone, the more their torso is turned away from you, the less committed they are to the interaction. And in other words, this is to do with a foot thing. They might be getting ready to leave. The other thing that could be happening is they're protecting themselves. They might feel under threat and so on, right? If you can see this a lot, for example, with anyone here, parent, has teenagers or kids, then they tell them off. Have you ever noticed that when you start telling your kids off, they'll do something like this? They'll become very protective. Either they'll hunch up, again, they're protecting those areas, or they'll turn away, they'll shield. Make sense? Do you see how the torso tells you? And it can happen very casually. If I'm having a normal conversation and you say something I don't like, I might say, no, I don't. Yeah, I agree with that. Did you see what happened there? And it can be very subtle. It might just be the raising of shoulder. I'm protecting myself. Eye blinks will happen the same, but we haven't gone to eye blinks yet, right? With arms, again, it's more to do with the motion of the arms, right? If I'm taking up very little space and I'm doing everything else quite the same way, what is this telling you about who I am and what I'm doing, right? In terms of my stress versus comfort levels, right? If my arms are more open and relaxed and expansive, right? Versus my hands are everywhere, right? Do you see how each of those things, you can already read those signals. I'm exaggerating them so you can see them, but they give you some very valuable information. Now, here's the key thing when reading body language. The main thing you can focus on when it comes to universal signals are basically stress and comfort, right? It's not truth or lies. It's not agreement and disagreement. It's stress or comfort. Now, stress tends to be followed by, accompanied certain things. For example, if someone lies, they tend to be more stressed because it requires more energy, more effort, and they're afraid of being caught. It's not universal. Some people are very good liars. In fact, they believe their lies themselves and makes them even better liars, right? And comfort. Someone may be telling you the truth and be stressed just because the situation makes them stressed. For example, in an interview, you ask a tough question, they give you the correct, the truthful answer, but they feel stressed by the emotion of the situation, so they might be giving you a stress signal, which would be, you would be making a mistake to interpret that as a lying signal. Does that make sense to you guys? Another thing you can see with the torso, especially when people are sitting, is tension. Body tension is accompanied by stress. So if you start talking about things someone finds, shall we say, is a vulnerable spot for someone, long before they push back, you'll see something like this. Either they'll tense up, motion will stop. This is where arms become very useful. When arms stop moving, when arms start freezing, then you know something's going on. Again, I'll give you something. This is a heuristic. This is a rule of thumb. And again, this is not a universal thing. But just to give you an example, if you ever see, this I got from a guy called Joe Navarro, who's an FBI agent, very, very well known. He knows body language very, very well. If you ever see a child doing normal children thing, an animal walks into the room, and suddenly the child becomes very still, you know that there is some big problem between that child and that adult. I'm not saying it's necessarily abuse, although it may well be. It may be emotional abuse, it may be physical. The child would probably be terrified of the other adult. And that's again to do with motion. We are programmed as fight or flight is actually incorrect. It's actually fight, flight, or freeze, of which freezing is the first response. Fleeing is the second response. Fighting is the last response, right? So when you see people suddenly freeze, you know that you've hit something that's threatening to them, right? This is great, a great thing to do, say in a negotiation, or when you are, or as a hypnotherapist, you're talking about different topics, this, that, and the other, and you might be making a point in terms of, let's say, the cost of something, and everyone's having it, everyone's chatting away, and suddenly the motion slows down, and then if you're not looking for it, you might just carry on because they didn't say anything, right? But you can see suddenly they're stiffening, or you'll see them drawing back slightly, right? Is this being useful for you guys? So we may as well. No, actually, I'll give you one thing in terms of the head, but then I'd rather you guys just experiment with the head and the other features a little bit before we go into that. So with the head, a nice little signal for comfort is a tilting of the head, right? People who tilt their head to one side, as a rule, are kind of comfortable, they're relaxed, and so on. And, you usually get this when people are listening, that's interesting, that's fine, right? So the minute they start getting stressed, the head will straighten out again, right? In terms of other tilts, as a rule, head down protects the throat, so that tends to be more a stress response, a fear response, and so on. Head up exposes the throat, people tend to be more confident, it's a signal of status, and so on. There's a slight, and again, these things, it depends on the whole, the cluster, the whole, what else is going on at the same time. For example, if I'm doing this, you can all clearly see that this is a lower status response, right? I'm basically saying I'm more meek, I'm not challenging, anything like that, right? But I can do the exact same thing, and just a shift in my expression, for example, will mean something very different. So if I do the same thing, but I lean forward and I frown, do you see how that has a very different effect? So the head tilt on its own doesn't mean, oh, this person is feeling frightened, shy, stressed, or whatever it is. It could also be a sign of aggression. I think it's partly because this is the hardest part of the head, so you're exposing the hardest part of the head before getting into conflict. But again, do you notice how these signals come with other things combined? Does that make sense? So you can't just aha, I saw that fingertip moving, therefore he is now, memorizing the alphabet, right? You can't do that. You have to first of all take a whole class of responses together, and then you put that in terms of these are universal kind of responses. And then each individual will have idiosyncrasies. Some people prefer to do some things than others. For example, a big difference between men and women. A big sign that people are getting stressed is they'll touch their neck area, right? As a rule, men will play with their collar, or if they have a tie on, they'll play with their tie. Even just preening is often a sign of stress, right? Sometimes it's actually a sign of preening, but again, that's why you have to have the whole thing. Women will very rarely touch the back of their neck. As a rule, women will touch the front of their neck, round about sort of just below the Adam's apple, that little dimple there, or they might adjust the shirt slightly, but they'll tend to touch over here, right? Unless, of course, they're pregnant, in which case the hand will go down here. Do you see where we're going with this? Again, it's just where the mind goes, the body has certain ways of following along with it. Is this useful to you guys? And I wish I could spend more time with you doing this, but that's hopefully just going to get you started on the whole journey of reading people more clearly, being able to see the difference between these universal signals across cultures, and these are cultural signals, like the handshake is a cultural signal, and then there's idiosyncrasies. In other words, an individual has their own behaviors and so on, which will again form patterns, which will again allow you to see where that person's at. But that last version will take time for you to discover, right? That first version you'll get instantly within making eye contact with the other person. Is that useful to you guys? All right, let's stand up and carry on.